Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing part 148 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. We take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got quite an interesting assortment of animals, quite a few birds, one returning animal, and we've got an extinct animal to finish us off, so it's really interesting. So we're going to be first starting off with Bongo Hardwood's blue crane. So really excited to talk about this one. So this is the blue crane. So they're also known as the Stanley crane or the Paradise crane. Their species name is Gurus paradisea. So these guys are a blue, kind of tall ground-dwelling bird, but actually fairly small by these crane standards. They typically reach about 100 to 120 centimeters, or about 3 foot 3 inches, or 3 foot 11 tall, and have a wingspan of about 180 to 200 centimeters, or between 5'11 and 6 foot 7 in terms of its wingspan, and weigh between 3.6 to 6.2 kilograms, or about like 13 pounds, which is quite interesting. And you can see they've got this very interesting pale grey colour to them, that is simply darker in the upper head, neck, nape and things, and then the crown goes like a little bit more whitish. They've also got long wingtip feathers with trail to the ground, so these feathers are quite long, which is quite interesting as well. And the primaries are typically black to slate grey with dark coverts, but unlike most cranes, they actually have much thinner necks and proportionally larger heads, which is interesting. And then you can see the juveniles are quite similar, but just a little bit more tawny colour, and they don't have these really long wing plumes as you can see here, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their habitat, these guys are birds of kind of dry grasslands, grassy uplands, usually like pastured grasslands of hills, valleys and plains with few scattered trees. They tend to prefer these areas in the nesting season that have access to both upland and wetland areas, that they feed almost entirely in dry areas. And they're called altitudinal migrants, so they typically nest in the lower grasslands between about 1,300 to 1,200 to 1,000 meters, and move down to lower altitudes during the winter. So typically their movement and behavior, they're actually one of the most restricted distribution of all the cranes. So even species with lower numbers like the Siberian or whooping cranes have a much more migratory, larger range than these guys. These guys are typically pretty much only found in South Africa, which is quite interesting. Mainly South Africa, with a population, I believe, in Namibia, which is quite interesting. So the blue cranes are typically partially social, typically less so during the breeding season, but they have a strict hierarchy, with larger adult males being dominant, and they overlap their range with 3 other crane species, and the interactions is not really known. They can be quite aggressively protective against their nests though, even attacking innocent non-predatory animals such as antelopes, cattle, tortoises, plovers, and even sparrows. So they're very protective parents, which is probably quite good. Humans are also attacked if they come too close in their nests, and they've actually torn clothes and drawn blood on people that have tried to get near their nests, so be careful of that. But true threats to these guys and their eggs and chicks includes large savanna and white-throated monitors, egg-eating snakes, foxes, jackals, meerkats, birds of prey, and mongoose. So in terms of feeding, these guys feed on the ground and appear really to feed near wetland areas. Most of the diet is typically grasses and sedges, and many types can be fed based on the proximity to their nests. They're also insectivores, so they typically like eating lots of insects such as grasshoppers. And small animals such as crabs, snails, frogs, small lizards and snakes may also supplement their diet, as they do like with these such protein-rich foods often break down and fed to the young, so they do supplement their diet a little bit with some extra meat. So in terms of their breeding period, we'll have a look at the baby where we talk about their breeding period, because these guys are little cuties. I do say so myself. So the breeding period is quite highly seasonal, with eggs being recorded between October and March, with pair forming among groups starting in October, beginning with both potential parents running circles around each other. Then they engage in like a dance and fling various objects in the air and then jump, and then eventually a female from the group and a male will select each other and both engage in that together, and that's kind of where they mate and they become a couple. In the great majority of nests, though, 2 eggs are typically laid, rarely 1 or 3, so typically 2, but sometimes can be up to 3. Both male and females will incubate, but males will often incubate during the night, and during the day, defending the territories while the female incubates. The incubation period lasts about 30 days, and the young are able to walk after 2 days after hatching and can swim soon after. They are still fed primarily by their mothers, who will regurgitate food into their mouths. And then the chicks will fledge at about age 3 to 5 months, and then the young will actually still continue, even after they're fledged, they will continue to be tended until the next breeding season, which is probably about a year or so, and then that's when they're chased off by their parents. So we're going to talk a little bit about their decline. So they were quite common in parts of their historic range. There was believed to be about 26,000 individuals until around the 1980s. There was a decline, and now they're classified as vulnerable. So in the last 2 decades, they've largely disappeared from Leslo, the Eastern Cape, things like that, and their populations in like the Free State and other areas of South Africa and Eastern Southern Africa as well have declined by 90%. Which is a little bit weird, but the main reason it's believed to be because of this decline, behind this decline, I mean, let's have a look. Is that a male or female? It's a female. Let's find a male. Let's have a look at you. So the main reason believed for this decline is human growth and the conversion of land for agriculture, but also poisoning or accidental threats such as like baits and things like that would be to be big issues for these guys. So that's why they've probably declined. And the South African government has set up some legal protections for these guys, also focusing on research, habitat management, and education. So luckily they are doing okay, and they are now considered moderately depleted by the IUCN. So they're not doing as well as they were, but they're still doing quite well. And we hope to have a little bit more. And they're quite important for a lot of cultures. They call it the flag, and then traditionally there was a man who disguised himself in a battle, and often decorated a chief with the blue crane feathers and like a ceremony. Also quite significant to the Zulu warriors, and actually used their feathers, and kings and warriors wore their feathers as in headdresses as well. So they're quite important to African culture. Also considered the national bird of South Africa, so that's quite cool. Really, really interesting guys. So we're going to be moving on from that. Bongo Hardwood, of course, did a wonderful job. We're going to be moving on to the person that's dominating pretty much the mod scene at the moment, Great Cake Mods. We've got a really cool mod. This one comes all the way from my homeland of New Zealand. We have got the Tawhiri, or the New Zealand penguin, or Fiordland penguin. Fiordland crested penguin. So the Fiordland crested penguin, also known as the Fiordland crested penguin, is a crested penguin species only found in New Zealand. A Māori name is a Tawhiri, I believe you say that. And it currently breeds around the southwestern coast of the New Zealand South Islands, as well as Stewart Island and its outlying Kana Islands. Because it originally reigned beyond this Fiordland range, it is sometimes referred to as the New Zealand crested penguin, and though it is occasionally found as vagrants in Australia. So it was first described in 1845 by English zoologist George Robert Gray, who called it Pachyrhinus, so kind of thick beak, pretty much. And this guy's about a medium-sized penguin. It's one of these smaller penguins in the genus of crested penguins. You can see they're medium-sized black to white penguin. They get to about 60 centimeters, or about 24 inches tall, and weigh about, on average, 3.7 kilograms or 8.2 pounds, with a weight range between 2 to 5 kilograms or 4.4 to 13 pounds. So you can see they've got a dark bluish underpart and a darker head. It extends all the way down the neck, and you can see they've got these broad yellow eyebrow stripes that extend. That's where they get their crested penguin name. They can be distinguished from the similar erect crested penguin and the snares penguin by having no bare skin around the base of their bill. And in terms of their kind of breeding, we'll talk about the breeding as we have a look at these cute little babies. I'm not sure if the size is quite right on these guys, but it is based off the little penguin. Anyway, female Fiordland penguins lay about a clutch of 2 eggs, with the first laid egg being much smaller than the second egg, generally hatching later, and typically shows higher mortality, demonstrating a brood reduction system that is actually quite unique among other avian groups. And they actually tend to have much higher breeding success than other penguins, even at sites that is introduced with introduced predators, or even native predators as well. So they seem to be doing quite well. They're quite well at reproducing, which is pretty cool. So as I mentioned, their habitat tends to be in colonies along tree roots and rocks in dense temperate coastal forests, and breed along the west coast of the South Island, from Bruce Bay all the way to Open Bay Islands, and around Fiordland and the Forex Strait, and on Stewart Island, also known as Rakiura, and its outlying islands. But there has been some fossils of the species found as far north as the northern end of the South Island, and potentially even nested on the North Island as well. And this range is believed to be drastically kind of decreased by hunting by the Polynesians, and now only really found in the least populated parts of New Zealand, and typically is a little bit present in Australia, typically as vagrants, so potentially some reintroductions or some just letting their numbers go up. They could potentially reintroduce themselves up back into the North Island, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their diet, their main prey species are typically cephalopods, so things like arrow squid, but they also eat a lot of crustaceans like krill and fish such as red cod and hoki. And however, this importance on cephalopods may be a little bit exaggerated, and it seems to vary depending on where they are. Maybe they're just sort of eating that seafood diet, they see what seafood they eat it. Yeah, really, really cool. So in terms of their conservation, they are classified as near threatened by the IUCN, and they've been changed from vulnerable to endangered by the Department of Conservation New Zealand 2013. So surveys in the 1990s counted about 2,500 pairs, though this is likely an underestimate, and due to introduced predators, human disturbance, and fleeing nests and leaving chicks exposed to predators, they have likely declined still. So as I mentioned, the main threats to most New Zealand animals at the moment is introduced predators like cats, rats, dogs, and stoats that can kill these penguins quite easily. And this is sadly part of the reason why they are so endangered. But luckily they seem to be still breeding alright, and hopefully with lots of trapping and things like that, their populations can go up. So yeah, really, really cool. Love to see these little guys. Definitely love these little pengoose. Definitely nice to see some New Zealand animals, of course, in the game. So that's another great cakes mod. And speaking of penguins, we've got another great penguin. It's going to be pretty great. We have got this really tall one here. We have got the royal penguin. So the royal penguin is a species of penguin that is actually only found on the subantarctic Macquarie Island and its adjacent islands. So there was some controversy whether this was a species of the macaroni penguin or just its own species. But they've been known to interbreed, but quite rare, so now they're pretty much considered to be their own species. So as I mentioned, they're typically found around waters surrounding Antarctica, with royals looking very much like macaroni penguins, but they have a white face and kind of chin. These guys are also quite a bit taller than most other penguins, like crested penguins. These guys get about 65 to 76 centimeters tall and weigh as much as 5 to 6 kilograms or 11 to 13 pounds, so quite a bit bigger. And males are typically larger than females, and as I mentioned, they're only known to breed on Macquarie Island and adjacent islands, and like other penguins, they spend most of their time at sea, only really coming up to breed and to molt on land. So in terms of their breeding, we'll find the babies as we talk about breeding. Look at these cute little guys, little baby pengoos. Little cuties. Anyway, they tend to nest on beaches or in bare areas and slopes of vegetation, and like most seabirds, they are colonial, so they'll nesting in scrapes up to about a mile inland. The breeding season typically begins in September and laying follows through October. Though the royals typically lay 2 eggs, only one survives. The eggs are kept warm by both parents for about 35 days, and this is done in rotating 12-day shifts. And after hatching, the male will care for the chick for about 2 to 3 weeks, while the female returns with food for both of them. And if the female is deployed or returns to the colony, the chick will die, sadly. And about 1 month of age, they'll begin to group together for warmth and safety, and both parents will continue to feed the chicks about 2 or 3 times a day. And when the chicks are about 2 months old, they will have grown into their adult plumage and will leave the colony and go to see food on their own, which is quite interesting. Go to sea to find food on their own. It's also common for mothers of multiple eggs to abandon their first egg once a day before their second egg arrives. And due to this abandonment, actually the first egg is about half the chance as the second egg is being kept. And the cause of this behavior is actually quite unclear. We don't know why these guys are so much into doing that, but it's very interesting. In terms of diet, though, these guys, very similar to other penguins, they feed on krill, small fish, and squid. And during the breeding season, they typically will hunt in localized areas in conjunction to neighboring colonies. And this includes cohabitation with other colonies by securing ice fish and things like that and competing for resources. So they typically don't try to stay too far from their colony so they can come back to the babies rather quickly. And royal penguins have been specified as least concern, but with a high risk of endangerment in the wild. So historically they were hunted for oil. Between 1870 and 1919, the government Tasmania had issues for them, and they killed both 150,000 royal and king penguins, taking them each year. But then at the peak of the industry, they were processing 2,000 penguins at a time, which is quite interesting, with each penguin making about half a litre of oil. But since then, the hunting has pretty much ended, and the numbers of the penguins have climbed to 850,000. And before hunting started, it was believed to be about 3 million, both royal and king penguins on the island. So these guys are definitely still recovering. But modern threats include things such as rats, and formerly cats and rabbits were originally on Mongoose Island, but they were eradicated. Things like plastic, pollution, and decreased food supply from commercial fishing. So they are doing okay in that regard, but they do have a lot of risks that they have to deal with, especially like introduced predators, which are getting eradicated, which is quite cool. It's quite cool stories of how many people have been going to offshore islands and eradicating a lot of pests, and the bird life just coming back and recovering, which is so cool. Yeah, really, really awesome penguin. Definitely do love these guys. A really, really big fan. So next up, we are going to have a look. This is another Great Cakes mod as well. Great cake, great cake. Next one is also Great Cakes. We are going to South America, looking at a primate for a change. We have got the really, really cool bald Ukari. This one's the red bald-headed Ukari. So these guys are a New World monkey that is characterized by having a very short tail and a bright crimson head, as you see there, bald head, and a long coat of fur, which is really, really interesting how it's come out. Did a great job. So the bald Ukari is about weighs between 2.75 and 3.45 kilograms, or between 6 to 7 pounds, with a head to body length on average about 45.6 or 18 inches for male, and about 44 centimeters or about 7 inches for female. And you can see generally they have this quite long shaggy coat that ranges from white color to red, and its head is bald. And you can see the tail is has a bob tail, kind of like a lot of other New World monkeys, rather short for New World monkeys, kind of very similar to Old World monkeys like macaques. And it's only half of the length of the body and head combined. And the scarlet red face is actually due to lack of skin pigment and plenty of capillaries or small blood vessels in their head that give it their kind of bright color. These guys, like other monkeys, are arboreal, and they turn to like to live in the flooded forests around the area of the Amazon River Basin, living around Peru and Brazil. It's also important that these guys are arboreal because the flooding of the forest actually greatly water rises quite high during the raining season. But during the dry season, they typically return to the ground looking for seeds and other food material. And there's actually a study looking to the diets of these guys. They typically feed a lot on seeds. About 67% of the diet was seeds. The rest of it was flowers and small animal prey and things like that. And they have powerful lower jaws which form a predocial comb, which actually allows them to open hard surfaces of unripe fruits and eat nuts, unlike a lot of other primates that most of them will not be able to eat. So it gives them like a niche that they can also find as well, which is quite interesting. And they're also considered philopathic, so these guys have general primate behaviors. So this means the male typically will leave the natal group once they've reached enough age. But these guys typically live in multiple male, multiple female groups that are between 5 to 30, and even sometimes can be up to 100, and they've been known to travel up to about 4.8 kilometers a day. As I mentioned, the females will stay around and the males leave the natal group and kind of roam around to find other groups. The total size typically of a home range for a group of bald Ukari is about 500 to 600 hectares, and they also defend this by using vocalizations, erections of hair, wagging of tails, and kind of use that to maintain their territory. And I bet everyone is wondering, why do they have these bright heads? So this bright facial hair is actually, the bright facial skin, you can see that quite bright skin, is actually a sign of good health and is actually allows a determination of healthy males. So the breeding season itself, we'll have a look at the babies while we talk about the breeding season, as we always like to do. Let's just see, we just need one that's not really fluffy, because that's, yeah, there we are. So these guys typically breed around October and May, and its gestation period is approximately 6 months, with both seasons, sexes having a central gland that might be involved in olfactory communication, especially during mating, where the female will encourage the male to mate by releasing kind of an attractive scent. And the bald Ukari lives approximately about 30 years, but they have been known to live over 30 years in captivity, which is quite interesting as well. For these cute little guys. And due to their location, it's actually quite common for these guys to get malaria. And animals that have caught malaria are typically quite a bit paler, and they are not chosen by partners, so they do not have the desired natural immunity to malaria, which is interesting. So, in terms of their conservation, these guys were changed from near threatened to vulnerable in 2008 because their species declined to less than 30% over the last 30 years because of hunting and habitat loss. So this is considered better than the ones in 1994 that considered endangered, but they're still considered a risk. But although their conservation status have improved, their numbers are still going down. And since they only live in water like flooded forests, they're very susceptible to human impacts like agriculture and pasture. So hunting and forest loss are the two most prominent threats to these guys. And in between 1980 and 1990, there was about 15 million hectares of tropical forest being destroyed every year. And this has been facing a lot of the southern parts and eastern parts of the Amazon. And the Amazon basin actually in 1997 kind of reached its peak, and the logging kind of really destroyed this. And this canopy distribution and disruption in forest loss directly affected the Ukari because of their lifestyle living in trees and having seed food consumption as well. But luckily, there has been lots of organizations, such as the pilot program to conserve the Brazilian rainforest, set forth by the World Bank to help them, giving them $350 million. But there's also lots of organizations helping to prevent illegal logging and deforestation and things like that. So that's quite cool as well. We definitely do love those kind of conservation efforts. So yeah, another great cakes mod and another great animal. Loved seeing the Ukari. Nice to finally see that in game. And next up, we've got another returning mod. This mod has probably returned multiple times, but I like covering it because it's actually been upgraded so much each time. Great Cakes typically likes to update this model all the time. So we're going to have a look at the European Pine Marten. So this pine marten is typically native to most of Europe, Asia, and the Caucasus. So a lot of those areas, considerably concerned as well. So you can see their fur is typically lighter to dark brown and is short and coarse during the summer, then gets longer and silkier during the winter. And you can see they have their crest bib you can see going on there. Their body is up to about 53 or 21 inches long, with the bushy tail that's about 25 centimeters. It weighs about 1.5 to 1.7 kilograms, about 3.3 to 3.7 pounds, with males are typically on average being slightly larger than females. And like these guys, they have, like other types of mustelids, they have very excellent sight, smell, and hearing as well, and typically inhabit well-watered areas. Typically found across Europe, but there have been some declines around Scotland, things like that. They were considered to be extinct in a lot of England, but recently they have been finding evidence of a small population holding on down there, which is quite cool. So interesting as well that the only mustelid with semi-retractable claws, so that allows them to be much more arboreal than their relatives, but they can still be quite quick runners. They're also mainly active at night and dusk, and they have small, rounded, highly sensitive ears that allow them to track prey. In terms of their prey that they're adapted to eat, they eat a lot of small mammals, bird, insects, frog, and carrion. They have been known to eat berries, fruits, eggs, nuts, and honey, and all that sorts of stuff. And they typically are territorial and mark their home ranges with feces and urine, things like that. And actually, the recovery of the European pine marten in Ireland has actually been credited with helping the reducing the population of the invasive grey squirrel. So these guys typically will eat the squirrels, and that allows the native red squirrels to actually be able to better evolve. And because the grey squirrel has actually evolved with the pine marten, they're better adapted to deal with them. So these guys eat all the grey squirrels, and then the red squirrels are better able to adapt because they can actually compete. Now they've got the pine martens eating the big grey ones instead of the red ones, which is interesting. So in terms of their lifespan, they typically can live to about 18 years in captivity, but their maximum age recorded to be about 11 years in the wild, with they typically actually only living about 3 to 4. So let's have a look at the little babies here. I don't know why they're still standing like that. I guess we've got to move these guys. Let's see how this goes. There we are. Here's the cute little baby. Anyway, so they reach sexual maturity at about 2 to 3 years of age, and copulation usually occurs on the ground that lasts about more than an hour. Mating occurs from July to August, and the fertilized eggs do not actually enter the uterus for about 7 months. The young are usually born around late March to early May after a month-long gestation, and that happens after implantation, so they have delayed implantation. And typically they have litters between 1 to 5. And young martens are typically about 30 grams or a little over an ounce when they're born, and then they'll emerge from their dens at about 7 to 8 weeks of age and give birth after they give birth, and then disperse from their den about 12 to 16 weeks after being born. And these guys, even though they're quite important predators, they still have animals that will eat them, such as European lynxes, wolverines, red foxes, golden eagles, white-tailed eagles, northern goshawks, and European eagle owls that all prey on pie martens, especially young ones. So the greatest threat to these guys have been humans, and while they have been vulnerable to conflict arising from predator control and other things, livestock as well, they're also been affected a lot by habitat loss of people cutting down their trees. But luckily they have been seen recovering in a lot of areas, which is quite good. They're also hunted for their fur, but that's not really much a thing anymore, with the woodlands recovering a lot in Europe, but also seeing the use of these guys as being helping invasive species, such as the invasive grey squirrel, as I mentioned, helping with the red squirrel. So it's a great example of how these guys can help. Their recovery is helping other species as well. So very important animal, and they're definitely doing quite well, hopefully. I believe they are considered least concern. Yeah, they're considered least concern. But yeah, really, really cool. Definitely a big fan. So next up, second to last, we've got another new mod from Great Cakes. We have got the yellow mongoose. So really, really cool guy here. So the yellow mongoose is also referred to as the red meerkat. So they're a member of the mongoose family. They typically get to between about 0.45 kilograms or about a pound in weight, and a weight are about 20 inches or 510 millimeters in length. And these guys live around the open country, semi-desert scrublands and grasslands of Botswana, Angola, South Africa, Namibia, and Zimbabwe. So these guys are the only member of their genus, and there's believed to be about 12 different species, but they were proposed by George Cuvier, actually, in 1829, who found this mongoose specimen. So it's quite interesting. So in terms of their characteristics, these guys have lighter highlights on their kind of chin, belly, and a bushy tail, and they do not have sexual dimorphism. Typically, southern mongooses are larger and have more reddish fur, fur, and a longer tail. The northern subspecies tend to be smaller, more grey, but it also just depends on anything. It could be just declined. I don't really consider. I don't think they're subspecies are just subspecies, but it most likely is probably a cline. So in terms of behavior, these guys are primarily diurnal, so nocturnal activity has been observed, and they typically live in colonies of about 20 individuals in like a permanent burrow complex, kind of similar to meerkats, and they often will coexist with things like Cape ground squirrels and surrogates, and share the maintaining of these warrens and kind of share them. And eternal systems, they typically have many entrances nearby. They will make their latrines as well. In terms of their diet, these guys are carnivores, so they feed mostly on termites, grasshoppers, crickets, but also feed on small birds and rodents. And in urban environments in South Africa, they have actually been known eating a lot of garbage as well. So these guys are also very hierarchical, so that's how their social system works. So it's based on a central breeding pair and the most recent offspring, and they're also subadults or the elderly and the relatives of the central pair. And the males' range will tend to overlap, while females from other dens will be of continuous non-lapping overranges. So every day the alpha male will mark members of his group with anal gland secretions and use these boundaries, and marks his boundaries with facial and anal secretions as well as urine to kind of mark everyone, say, this is my area. The alpha male then rubs back against raised objects and using his hair as like a marker of the territory. And other members of the group make their dens with cheek secretions, and these big colonies can have between 20 to 40 members, which is quite interesting. And these guys, even though they're little cuties, very much like meerkats, they do face other predators. So predators can include birds of prey, snakes, and jackals. And while frightened, the yellow mongoose will growl and secrete from its anal glands, and it can also scream, bark, purr, things like that, though they're usually silent. But yeah, these guys, I forgot to mention these are actually done by Gaboy and General Pizza, just to remember. Not Great Cakes. I think I got a little bit mixed up there. But we're going to have a look at these little babies here. This is their little babies. So typically the mating season for these guys is between July to September, and they'll often give birth underground between October to December with no bedding material really, and in a clear chamber in the burrow system. And usually, two offspring is produced per pregnancy, and they're weaned at about 10 weeks old and then reach their adult size about 12 months. So a little bit different to meerkats, and they are kind of related to meerkats. They're in that same kind of group. They are, like a little mongoose. But yeah, very interesting as well. They actually are some concerns of mongooses being reservoirs for rabies. With most African wild animals dying within several weeks of being affected with rabies, but there seems to be yellow mongooses can carry rabies with no symptoms, so they're asymptomatic, but can actually be infectious for years. So they can be an interesting vector, and it's one thing that we've got to worry about, of course, because we don't want rabies. It's a very deadly thing for a lot of animals. But yeah, really, really cool. I do love these little yellow mongooses. Good boy and Genera Pizza correcting it this time. They all did a really great job with these wonderful little mongoose. I definitely love seeing some more obscure animals and new things added. So yeah, really, really cool. So last, but certainly not least, we've got Viral Cyclops, who's made their first habitat or exhibit animal mod, or habitat ex animal mod, I'd say. After making those two interesting, after making all those JWE mods and a couple, mods from the exhibits, we have got the Steppe Bison. So the steppe bison, also known as the steppe bison, is Bison priscus. These guys are an extinct species of bison, or I'll say Bos priscus as well, because that's the proper genus. These guys were widely distributed across the mammoth steppe, with the woolly mammoth, ranging from Western Europe all the way into Beringia into North America during the late Pleistocene. It's actually considered ancestral to all the modern species of American bison, such as the modern American bison, but also like bison latifrons, things like that. So it's believed to be these guys first appeared around the middle Pleistocene in Eastern Eurasia, and then kind of moved westward towards the Western Europe. And between the late Middle Pleistocene, about 195,000 to 135,000 years ago, these guys would have migrated into North America and becoming ancestral to North American bison species like Bison anticus, and the obviously plains bison, and the long-horned bison latifrons, which is quite interesting. So that shows how that kind of evolution works. So in terms of their description and looks, they're not too different from most other bison species. They look very much like the American wood bison. The steppe bison was a little bit bigger though. They got about 2 meters tall, or about 6'7" at the shoulder, or at the withers, and reached about 900 kilograms, or probably a little bit over a ton in weight sometimes. But the main difference is that these horns were about half a meter long. There's actually a subspecies, which is known in Eurasia, that was actually quite similar to Bison latifrons, believed to be a similar size and had very big horns that were about 210 centimeters, 83 inches apart, and potentially had similar habitats, so kind of like a analogous subspecies, you could say. But in most of its anatomy, it's more similar to the European bison, or kind of Bispinaris, which is actually quite difficult to actually tell. Distinguish it for when you don't have complete skeletons, and they were believed to be close enough to interbreed. However, they were genetically distinct enough and had different niches to be considered different species. But we do have genetics showing that they bred a lot with European bison as well. But you can have a look at the females here. It's very interesting as well. These guys were quite well distributed. When the end of the Ice Age happened, their distribution became quite constricted, and they actually managed to survive into the mid-Holocene before becoming extinct. So these guys are actually kind of the last later surviving megafauna. There was a steppe bison that was radiocarbon dated to be about 5,400 years old in Alaska. And there actually have been remains found of them between 2,500 to 4,000 BCE, and even some in Russia to 1,100 to just over 1,000 years ago, which is very interesting. So these guys are one of those later surviving bison. And the cause for the extinction of the steppe bison and most likely other species, the great ending of the Ice Age, is hotly debated, but it's believed to be between people, climate change, and disease, but there's many other factors. It's a very complicated debate. I'm sure everyone likes to talk about it, but the main factors were probably humans and climate change, and disease may have played a part. I would say it's a combination of those two factors, depending on where you are in the world, and it's very much more complicated than humans or climate change. It's one of those things. But I would say in the case of European buffalo, the steppe bison would have been a lot to do with people, or potentially that and climate change, since its habitat would have shrunk a lot during the end of the Ice Age. But yeah, it's actually quite well known. So there's been cave art seen of it, but also there was a blue babe who was a 36,000-year-old mummy of a male steppe bison discovered in Alaska, which was found by gold miners. And they nicknamed the mummy Blue Babe because of the... And there actually is a variant that is blue, that is meant to be Blue Babe, which is the, Blue Babe, the oxen that Paul Bunyan has, which is very interesting. But the reason it's blue is because of the coating of riverite, which is a phosphate that covers a lot of the specimen. But yeah, there's been other mummies, things like that. Also frozen tails, and even has evidence of DNA. So they could potentially be cloning in the future, which would be quite interesting. This would be an interesting animal to clone, I think, considering how we have much closer relatives around today. Would be much easier, and especially being a large mammal, and we know have a much more better idea of cattle breeding than, let's say, elephants, because we breed cattle all the time. It's agriculture, so we have a much better idea of their anatomy. I would say steppe bison is a great candidate for being de-extincted. But there also is remains of the steppe bison found in Denisova Cave, which is the site where the first remains of the Denisovans, which was an interesting group of people, extinct humans, were found. So very interesting as well, very interesting part of history. Really, really cool. So yeah, this is a great mod, Virus Cyclops, and also good boy Engineer Pizza did a great job with the yellow mongoose. Bongo Hardwood did a great job with the blue crane, and everything else. Great cakes mod. You've really been knocking out of the park with these mods. It's really, really awesome. So yeah, I think this is a great place to end the video. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.